why you encouraged atheists in Great Britain to go to church last Christmas.
Good question. We go straight into the deeps. Well, obviously Britain, where I'm from, and Europe more generally, the situation with religion is different from the situation you have here. I mean, there are all sorts of differences, all sorts of similarities, but we don't have in Britain a kind of any form of strong Christianity that I see as being any threat in the public sphere. I mean, our bishops are all basically on the verge of atheism, as far as I can see. If you get a bishop in Britain, I mean, the hardest thing to do for them is to affirm what was their creed. You know, it's filled with sort of God, as it were. You know, so we have the sort of doubting bishop as a sort of perpetual part of the comedy of British life, and so we don't have that assertive form of religion which can still exist here, and in certain states is very strong. And I think it's partly, I write a bit about this quite a bit in this recent book. I think that we are in a very strange place in Europe, in Britain, in our relation to faith. And for all sorts of reasons, of which we can get into, we are in this situation that a wonderful French philosopher called Chantal del Sol described as being in the situation that Icarus would have been in if he'd survived the fall. That is, that by the time that the Cold War finishes in Europe, we've dreamed all of these religious dreams and they've all crashed. We've dreamed all of these political dreams, including two big ones in the 20th century that turned out to be global nightmares. So that by the time the last of those falls, we are on the ground, wounded, burnt, singed, badly bruised, and rather amazed to find that we're still here, with this big question that then comes up, which is, what do we do? And again, I mean, this doesn't apply in quite the same way in this country as I see it.
Which I think may be one of the reasons why this kind of question goes up, but I want to let you get through it.
But I suppose one of the things I feel, and I know a lot of people now in Europe from the political left, right, center ground, atheists, non-atheists, and so on, who are starting to worry. And I suppose the worry, for me, condenses into this, which is the increasing fear that the Enlightenment didn't go very deep or very wide or very far, and that it turns out not to be cherished by all that many people, and that what might come down the road might be so much worse. I put it no stronger for now than the nervousness. And since this is a situation we're in, I mean, I'm an atheist, I have been for many years. I don't believe in the little claims of the Bible or anything else. But I do recognize something which in Europe, at any rate, I see and I'm concerned about, which is what I regard as a vacuum. And one of the only interim answers I've been able to put forward is to say, we can accept the fact that we're atheists, we can accept the fact that we don't believe in literal truth and so on, and yet have to find a way to remind ourselves and each other of how we got to where we are. Because there's a whole set of things which I and others start to worry about. And one of the few ways I've found to try to explain this is to say that includes in engaging in parts of your past which you no longer believe in, at the very least to know how you got to where you are now. So I didn't say in that piece that people should go to church and praise the risen Lord, but to say to them, at least engage in the thing that got you to the place you are now, and know how it happened. Let me put it another way very quickly. One of the most striking things, there's a British rabbi called Jonathan Sacks, who has some position here in New York as well. Some years ago I said to him, a slightly impertinent question, but I said, Rabbi Sacks, I know quite a lot of your congregation in London, and how can I put this, but they all seem to be atheists, or at least a lot of them. And without missing a beat, he said, "Oh, most of them, I'd have thought." And I said, he could see I was sort of slightly thrown. And I said, well, what do you take from that? And he replied rabbinically with a non-answer. He said, this year 98% of British Jews will be celebrating the holidays. And this is just an interesting way through a bit of this, it seems to me. Accepting the realities of where we are, but not casting people into, particularly the people you and I both know and have come across, who find the position, once they arrive there, of atheism to be a very lonely place. And I just, as I say, it's not an answer to the whole thing, but as an interim thing, to say at least remain engaged in all of this idea and all of this past. Engage with it.
I think I might understand what some of the confusion and concern is, and I suspected some of this is differences on either side of the pond. And for me, not having grown up in Britain, suffocated by Church of England, and its largely atheistic irrelevancy, I find it strange that you're talking to a rabbi who says that 98% of Jews are going to be celebrating the holidays. I'm assuming he's talking about Christmas.
Oh, no, he's talking about the Jewish holidays.
He's talking about the Jewish holidays. And yet, we know that studies have shown that 50% of Jews in Israel are secular.
Sure.
And Reform Judaism doesn't require any belief in a God. So
sure.
we often make a mistake of talking about religion as if it's one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely false, because Judaism, even in its varieties, is already very different. The Reform Judaism doesn't require a belief in a God, and so you get a rabbi that's not surprised that his congregation is largely atheist, and then you get conservative and Hasidic Jews that I doubt very many of those are atheists, and then you have the various varieties of Christianity, and one of the questions that's come up quite often is, why is the view of religion in the UK so much different from the way it is in the States? And I've often heard it put forward that this is an issue of a free market, where in the UK, because you have a state religion, there was no competition to draw people in, and the United States, we had freedom of religion, and so they're in competition to market.
Yes, let me give an example of that. Everybody in the UK lives technically in a parish. And that means that the priest in that parish could, even if you were a non-believer, be responsible for your spiritual well-being, for your funeral, for instance. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone automatically gets a Church of England funeral, but it means that the default position is that the state church would be there. Whereas I think if you were a Catholic, for instance, if you were an atheist and you died, your local Catholic church would not stake any claim for your religious rights. So there is it has done something strange like that. The other thing is just that, who knows, it's just a lot more advanced in Europe, for good and ill, but that they say that, the southern Mediterranean states, Italy, Catholic Church is very strong still, Spain very strong. So you have to draw up these distinctions within it. But basically in the Protestant parts of Europe, there's very little. They some time ago, I think, became basically the Green Party at prayer. They explain how important it is to tackle global warming and so on, which is all good. But it's not saying to people, you have to affirm the creed, otherwise you're going to hell.
I heard good things about Spain in the last few years, pulling away from the church and instituting a far more secular government, to the point where I joked that if my country became a theocracy, I'd go to Spain, because at least I had 2 years of high school Spanish, which sets me up better.
The country that is most striking in is Ireland. I first went to Ireland, I did my first book in the late 90s, 2000. And then Ireland was still a very, very, it's the most oppressively religious country in Europe I'd been to. The Catholic Church had such a grip. Today, I don't think you could find a more secular country. It's really fascinating, and it's one thing in particular, which is a clerical abuse scandal, which has just turned the Irish people, understandably, against the whole thing. And, to the extent that a bishop now stands up and makes a moral pronouncement, and the Irish public want to do the opposite. In fact, the Catholic Church, I can't remember what was in the abortion debate or the gay marriage. Yes, they sat out the gay marriage debate, basically, because they knew that if they came out against, the public vote in the referendum would be even bigger for gay marriage.
And the scandals, they go deep there. They're not just dealing with pederasts and child rapists. This was theft of children from unwed mothers and workhouses and just...
and in living memory.
Yeah.
No, it's an extraordinary thing, but to see a society shift that fast in 18 years or so is a remarkable thing.
Which kind of sticks a pin in what everybody who knows me knows I've been waiting to object to. If the fear is we're losing something, so as a stopgap measure, go back to what got you here. I might have a slight issue with going back to what got us here if the place we are is that we're bleeding and bloody on the ground after the fall. But one of the things that the secular community in the United States has been doing, for the longest time, atheism in the United States was a bunch of guys that looked like me complaining about how much religion sucked and congratulating themselves for getting the right answer to what I think is literally the easiest question: do I have enough reason to believe this? But as we move forward, and the percentage of the population that identify as nones, the N-O-N-Es, no religious preference and no religious identity, we've started to do things like, well, actually Sunday Assembly, I think, started in Britain, but it's here as well, an oasis, and we're building landing places that are founded on principles of secular humanism, which can serve as one potential moral and virtue guiding principle, but also create places for people to land when they find their way out of religion.
Sure.
And I'm happy to tell people, I go to church not for the reasons that you're suggesting, but I go to church more often than people would guess, because on the TV show, I want to make sure that I am not straw-manning religious views.
Do you ever get surprised when you do that?
Not anymore.
No.